Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news, and with the cars hitting the paddock for the Spanish Grand Prix, we've finally got to have a look at some of these upgrades the teams are bringing. Mercedes with some floor changes, plenty going on with Ferrari as well, and also some indications that Ferrari's power unit is still the strongest out of all the cars on the grid. Very much intrigued your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. Really up to the channel, thanks very much indeed for doing that, rocketing towards 2k. Firstly, this is what the Aston Martin looks like. Seemingly some slight changes here to the side pods. The rumour has it, at least a few days ago the rumour had it, that Lance Stroll was going to be the only one with the B spec of their car. They're bringing what they're effectively calling an entirely new car this weekend. Now, apparently Vettel is going to get it as well. We'll see that here in a second. That, of course, would ideally be the case. Now, there's been plenty going on lately with the kind of other drivers stepping in for FP1. All the teams have to have like 2 mandatory rookie driver sessions. Yuri Vips is stepping in for the Red Bull guys, and there's actually plenty going on across the grid. I believe Vips is replacing Perez in FP1. De Vries is replacing Albon in FP1, interestingly enough. So, well, arguably they can compare De Vries over to Latifi, and Kubica is in the Alfa Romeo. Not sure exactly why this is the case. Not a rookie driver thing, of course. I wonder if it's kind of like a contractual obligation or something they want to do. I'm pretty sure like Toto Wolff also promised Grosjean kind of a test drive for Mercedes as well at some point or another. So we'll see if that happens at some point down the line. But yeah, that's what's going on in FP1 at this weekend. Of course, FP1 is going to be a pretty big deal for some of these teams to see if any of these upgrades actually work in a track setting. Now, well, as Ferrari News points out, actually the budget cap, we looked yesterday that there's going to be no replacement to the Russian Grand Prix. There was rumours about a second Singapore Grand Prix, a Qatar Grand Prix coming through, and therefore it means, because I'm pretty sure the budget cap, the way it worked is, like any kind of race in excess of 20 gave you another 1.2 mil to your budget cap, so that's been kind of, well, rounded off to $1.2 million for the entire budget cap for the season, but it still does give the teams a little bit maybe more room to play with than they would have if there were 23 races this year as was initially planned. So let's have a look at this then. So Mercedes yesterday, they did the filming day, and as soon as this image was posted, George Russell was in the car yesterday, everyone was like, okay, oh my god, a second, let's look at this car, let's see if we can see any differences to what it looked like before. There has been a few differences noted. This angle doesn't really tell the entire picture, but you can see one of the stays at the back of the car here. You'd imagine in this filming day they were kind of testing the new stuff that they want to try out, but the floor here looks rather similar to kind of what we have seen before, even though some kind of these like divot things here that create the vortices, there seems to be less of those nowadays than there was before, so they're going to try and find some solutions here with the aerodynamic upgrades they're trying to bring in. It seems like the front of the floor here as well is slightly different to what they're used to be using, and also the rear wing seems somewhat more squared off than previously. We'll see some other images here in a second. This is one actually kind of the front of the floor. This is what things look like in Miami, and then in Spain, this kind of front of the floor, as I said, has now been kind of, well, wrapped away to some degree, and this is this kind of like outcrop here is the only thing seemingly left, so thought that was rather interesting, to be honest. Maybe slightly different angles, so you can definitely see there was a clear difference on that front. Now, this also was noticed, they kind of wheeled the car out in, for some reason, road tyres into the paddock. Of course, when they kind of roll the cars out into the paddock, they don't necessarily have to have the upgrades attached, right? Even though at this stage in the season, there's probably like no necessarily downside to doing so, right? Like at the start of the season before it began, it makes sense to be a bit more secretive. At this point of the season, probably doesn't make all that much difference. But I mean, yeah, that's kind of what they do here for some reason. And this is kind of a bit of a comparison. So I'm not sure exactly when the top image was taken here. This might have just been what we saw from George Russell using, and definitely the floor here, I believe, looks slightly different to what we have seen, for example, in Miami. But the bottom side looks different once again. And this is definitely a very new image because you can see the road tire on the car right here. So I believe this is when they were kind of rolling the car in. And the floor again looks rather different, maybe somewhat smaller than it used to be, at least kind of Toto Wolff was talking about the fact that their floor came so far out the sides of the car compared to a lot of the other teams, and they might have reduced that to some degree. The stay, of course, is gone on this one, but potentially they could put it back in, so it's a bit of an interesting one, but they are hoping that these changes, these upgrades, will help them reduce the porpoising so they can run at, well, a lower ride height, and that's also what Ferrari are hoping. We'll see that here in a second, because at Red Bull it seems to generate much more downforce, or significantly more downforce from the underside of their car, which is giving them advantages because they can run at less downforce rear wings and front wings, which means they can gain the greater advantage of the less drag on the straight, even though their power unit is actually slightly weaker, as we shall see. Now, also other teams are bringing upgrades as well, not of course just Mercedes. Alfa Romeo, they're bringing an upgrade package here to Spain. Apparently only Bottas is going to get it. We'll see right at the end of the video that actually Bottas has been way ahead of guanyu, as you might well expect, in terms of qualifying pace, and this may only exacerbate those differences. Now, Aston Martin, of course, they're bringing their new AMR 22B car this past weekend, or this upcoming weekend, the major upgrade they're calling that. So apparently both cars will have it, as initially it was just talked about being Lance Stroll, that there was quite a lot of like backlash on really the fact that you give it to Stroll as opposed to giving it to Vettel, for example. We looked at some of those pictures a little bit ago. This is another kind of a look at the pitch here. As Mr. Felbrega points out right here, the kind of differences in the cooling system and the configuration of the cooling system to what it used to look like down here at the bottom and now what it currently looks like. So they reckon this is a significant change. We'll see if it will make them push them further up the grid this weekend. Now, just as I was recording this, I've just seen this, which I thought was quite incredible, actually, about what the Aston Martin actually looks like when it's kind of all come out into the paddock itself. Now, it looks incredibly like, to be honest, the Red Bull car. So, of course, they've come up with this B version, as we just described, and these are some of the images, just looking at this car. Like, the side pods are rather distinctive on the Red Bull, and this one looks rather similar. It must be said that, this team in general, Aston Martin, formerly, I suppose, Racing Point, and what they did with the pink Ferrari back in the day, and what some are arguing that kind of the Haas are doing right now with a white Ferrari, even though that hasn't really been the case the last few races. Like, maybe Aston Martin are going back to their roots here and basically just doing what they used to do, straight up ripping off another team's successful design. So, people are starting to look at this Aston Martin and thinking, okay, wow, this looks an awful lot like a Red Bull. So, I'm sure there might be some talk about this. This is a kind of one of the bigger angles, so you can see the kind of, exactly what the side pod looks like. But this is the comparison, really, between the Red Bull on the top here and now what it looks like a pretty much identical side pod design on the Aston Martin B version at the bottom. So, very much intriguing your perspective on this one. Have they just straight up ripped off Red Bull's design? Rather, it looks like it, to be honest, with this B-spec version of the car. Will there be any backlash? Well, I suppose we'll wait and see on that one. Let's talk about McLaren very briefly as well, because they apparently are bringing an upgrade package that could be worth up to 0.5 of a second per lap. That would be, of course, be a rather big deal. Thing is, if every team is expecting to kind of gain 0.3 of a second per lap with all these upgrade packages, then that's not going to push McLaren too far in the right direction. But certainly, this is probably the biggest number that we have seen so far out of any team or any kind of theory as to how much some of these upgrades may actually improve some of these cars. So, McLaren, they're very hopeful their upgrades will work in the right direction. They've been pretty up and down so far this season. Great weekend at Imola. They looked good in Australia, especially when compared to Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, but recently in Miami, it wasn't too good for them either, right? So hopefully this weekend, at least from their perspective, they can start clawing back some advantages in the right direction. But definitely want to talk about Ferrari here, because it's not just the engine, but it's also the upgrades they're bringing. Giuliano De Chessa reckons that, 0.3 of a second pretty much is what they're looking for with this new upgrade they're bringing through. And as Lawrence Brotto says right now, they perceive the gap to be about 0.2 seconds to Red Bull. This could overturn that gap, but it's not like Red Bull are slowing down on the upgrades front either, largely because their porpoising issue is, they believe it's not really too much of a problem. We'll talk about that here in a second. Now, being a high downforce track here in Barcelona, they're going to have to use the kind of, high downforce, high load rear wings, and this seemingly is what Ferrari are going for this weekend, and they've changed the design of this to some degree. We can see the comparison here between what it was before at the bottom side and what it is now. So I believe the plan here is to reduce the drag from this rear wing, because as you can see, as it stretches out here from the middle to the edge, it actually goes up a lot quicker in the older version on the bottom here to what we currently have here in Barcelona. So it's a lot much more flatter profile. You can see some of the arrows, or the finger point things that are, out there points towards here. But there's a few changes, as you can see, with the new one. So theoretically, the same downforce, but reduced drag. And also what it means is, in terms of the DRS flap when it opens, there should be a larger amount of benefit from the DRS flap now than what it was before, because they've kind of suffered with that the last few races. When Max Verstappen's right behind Charles Leclerc, he's going to breeze past with DRS, especially because of the straight line speed advantage caused by the reduced drag that the Red Bull has compared to the Ferrari. But the other way around, it seems really difficult for the Ferrari to gain that kind of speed advantage, and maybe this kind of DRS benefit can actually help them a little bit, especially the DRS advantage should probably be greater on this new wing than it was before. And as is kind of described right here actually by Giuliano De Chessa, not the best angle, but there is some comparison to be made here between, I think, what it used to be here on the right hand side when it kind of curves up rather early, and then it stretches out a little bit more on the left hand side right here. But this should allow a greater external volume with DRS open, while with the flap closed, the load remains pretty high, as of course it was before. This also has been a big talking point in the last few hours actually, apparently investigations from Red Bull and Mercedes indicates that the Ferrari engine is currently 4 kilowatts or so ahead of Honda, and about 8 kilowatts or so ahead of what Mercedes are pumping out, largely due, you would imagine, to the changes to the fuel regulations, right, the E10 fuel or whatever it's called, the 10% of that in the fuel itself, the theoretically sustainable stuff, and maybe Mercedes haven't quite adapted to that as well as the Ferrari guys have. So their engine apparently is still more powerful, and they reckon there's actually more to come from the Ferrari engine. They are already, though, on their second power unit, whereas still it seems like Red Bull are on their first. So maybe Red Bull won't take an engine penalty this year. Ferrari might well have to at some point. That certainly has been the rumour that they're actually planning to take an engine penalty at some point in the season, but maybe that means they can unlock a bit more power, than they already have the advantage over Honda. But even with this advantage, they still don't have the straight line speed advantage due to the better drag profile that the Red Bull has at the present time. And as is described right here, what might happen as a result of things. But the Ferrari's still stronger in terms of pure engine performance, it seems, than both Red Bull and Mercedes. This I thought was rather interesting actually from this Amos article, kind of talking about Red Bull versus Ferrari, describing how the Red Bull's faster on the straights, the Ferrari is faster in the corners, but actually it's a little bit different story in Miami because the Ferrari had more overheating tyres than the Red Bull did, which has honestly been a problem for Ferrari the last couple of races compared to Red Bull, talking about, okay, which tracks favoured Red Bull, which ones might not have done, but I'm also talking about the fact that apparently the Red Bull generates more downforce through the underside of the car than Ferrari, essentially allowing it to run smaller wings, which therefore means Ferrari have to do the opposite. They have more drag on the straight as a result of things. This I thought actually was rather interesting to me, the fact that Ferrari still has issues with their porpoising, Red Bull doesn't seem to, and as they describe here, they know that they've got the porpoising covered, they don't believe that it's going to reoccur, therefore they can go full force into their upgrades with all their might as is described, whereas Ferrari are more reluctant to develop. They're kind of worried that the porpoising problem might reappear if they do things a little bit wrong. So definitely gives you an insight into the advantage that Red Bull have right now without the porpoising, is that they can go gung-ho really into all the upgrades, not worried about it, whereas Ferrari, Mercedes, these other teams, that's a kind of key issue they have to overcome, whereas Red Bull can just straight up say, okay, our car's great, let's just make it lighter, which is kind of the key progression that they are making over these last few weekends. Ferrari do have some advantages though. It seems like the kind of F175 is easy to set up for all the tracks. I think that's kind of what we saw in Australia, that the Red Bull setup wasn't so good on Sunday, despite it being a pretty good qualifying car, and therefore they fell behind Charles Leclerc an awful lot in the race there, because I think they said they got their setup wrong. And they have also had issues on Fridays a lot of the time. So like obviously it's going to take a bit more time for Red Bull potentially to get set up for the weekend. Once they do so, their car is faster, but the F175 is a bit more consistent potentially through all the different straights. So thought it was an interesting kind of discussion here. Ferrari does have a very strong engine. The Red Bull is also about 7 to 8 kilograms heavier, it seems though, than the Ferrari, which costs them about 0.3 of a second. They're going to try and reduce that. So yeah, definitely it does seem like reading this one that the Ferrari has some advantages, but it's certainly, well, advantage in the Red Bull camp at least for now, and probably going into this upcoming weekend. So we shall see how that one goes. This is we just mentioned that neither Red Bull or Ferrari are even close really to that minimum weight limit of 798 kilos, but the Ferrari is about, well, a little bit closer, which could be worth about 0.3 of a second. So interesting stuff, no doubt. I'm very much intrigued to hear your thoughts on this one in the comment section below. And just as we close out the video here, as I kind of promised, wanted to mention this, the fact that Lando Norris has now out-qualified his teammate Daniel Riccardo in 9 successive sessions. That is comfortably the longest active streak, at least, in Formula 1. Quite something, actually. And if we look at this throughout the entire season, thought it was kind of incredible that the average qualifying advantage from the man highlighted here to their teammate in question is actually, well, very small between Verstappen and Hamilton. Hamilton and Verstappen have the two smallest differences between them. Kind of Hamilton has the quickest on average compared to Russell. Verstappen has the quickest on average compared to Perez. But like it's awfully close between Verstappen and Hamilton in terms of percentages. Alonso, Leclerc, Gasly, Stroll relatively close, and it jumps a little bit to Magnussen. That's a fair bit of an advantage. This isn't like a 1/10 of a second or like, 0.3. It's actually just, well, at percentage terms. So Albon has not a 1 second advantage, but a 1% advantage, which is actually on some tracks even more significant. Norris is about 0.5% up on Riccardo, and Bottas, as we see, 0.8% up. So quite something, honestly, how it kind of, starts out very small between these two guys and then wraps up massively towards the end. But of course, all can change throughout the rest of the season.